You think you know who you are. Most people do. But be honest with me for a second. When was the last time there was truly no one watching? Not just no people in the room, no phone in reach, no feed to check, no version of you being quietly performed for a room that isn't even there. Real, total unwatched. Most of us can't remember. Some of us have never had it. Stay, and we're going to measure something. The distance between the you that shows up when you're seen and the one that's left over when absolutely no one is looking. That gap has a name, and it turns out to be the only honest answer to the question you clicked on. I caught myself once composing the caption in my head, alone, narrating my own quiet evening to an audience that did not exist. And when I tried to actually be unwatched, no phone, no story running, I realized I'd been performing for a ghost for years. So here's the part that unsettled me, and it's where we're headed. There might not be a real you waiting under the masks. When they come off, someone still has to be home, and most of us have never once gone in to check. So before we go looking for whoever's home, one thing. This channel exists to ask the questions the feed is built to keep you too distracted to ask. 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you'd rather meet yourself than keep performing yourself, subscribe, not for me, for whoever's in there when the noise finally stops. And like this if that ghost audience landed a little too close. Now, the investigation. Let me tell you the exact moment this started, because it's small and a little embarrassing. I was alone one evening. Nothing special, coffee going cold, rain on the window, the kind of quiet you're supposed to enjoy. And I noticed my own mind, in the background, writing it, framing the scene. Man sits alone with his thoughts, rain on the glass, composing the caption. For no one. There was no one there, and no plan to post anything, and I was still narrating myself to a camera that didn't exist. And once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. The way I'd arrange my face a certain way even with no one in the room. The way a silence longer than a few seconds sent my hand to my pocket, automatically, like the quiet itself was a threat. I wasn't resting in my own company. I was performing it, hosting some invisible guest who never showed up, but somehow had to be entertained, which led me to a question I genuinely couldn't shake, and it was worse than any ordinary loneliness. If I perform even when I'm completely alone, if there's a show running when there's no audience, then who exactly am I when the show stops? Is there someone under there? Or is the performance all the way down? But before I tell you what I found when I went looking, I want to be fair to the comfortable answer, the one you've been handed your whole life, because it sounds right, and it's the first thing that falls apart. The comfortable answer is 2 words. Be yourself. You've heard it 1,000 times. Underneath all the roles you play, the work self, the family self, the polite self for strangers, there's a real one. The authentic you. And the whole task of a life is just to peel the masks off and let that true self finally breathe. And I want to be fair to it, because it's not entirely wrong. There is a difference between the face you wear in a meeting and the one you wear at home. Some masks are heavier than others, and taking them off matters. I'm not going to pretend authenticity is meaningless, but look closer at the assumption hiding inside it. Be yourself quietly promises that a finished self already exists, waiting, fully formed, the second the performing stops. And that's exactly what I stopped believing. Because I watched myself get alone, really alone, and I did not become more authentic. I just changed audiences. I performed for the ghost, or I ran from the silence straight into a screen. The mask didn't drop to reveal the real me. There was no obvious me standing there when it dropped. So I stopped asking the question everyone taught me to ask, who's the real self hiding under the masks? It assumes he's already in there. And I started asking a colder one. When the masks actually come off, is anyone home at all? The first clue came from the last place I expected, a private notebook written almost 2,000 years ago by a man who never meant for you to read it. Marcus Aurelius, Roman Emperor, 121 to 180 AD. Think about what that title actually meant then. The most powerful, the most watched human being alive. Every public act performed in front of an empire. And this man kept a journal, in Greek, at night, on military campaigns, surrounded by war and plague, that he never intended to publish. We don't even know what he called it. The name that survived, Ta Eyes Hjorten, just means things to himself, not a book, not a message. A man talking to the one person who'd never be an audience, himself. And here's what he was writing about, over and over. Not strategy, not legacy, character. How to stay decent when no one's making you. How to not be corrupted by the power everyone could see. The most observed man in the world was doing the real work in the one room no one could enter, his own mind. Sit with that. He didn't find his character out in the open, in front of Rome. He built it in private, where there was no applause to earn and no punishment to dodge. Which cracked the whole thing open for me. The private self isn't discovered, sitting there finished, waiting for the masks to fall. It's practiced, built, rep by rep, in the unwatched hours. So if that's true, if the self is something you make where no one's looking, then the next question is brutal. What happens to a person who almost never has an unwatched hour? And that's exactly where this stopped being comfortable. One honest pause. I'm not holding anything back. The second clue is next, the one about who you're performing for even when you're completely alone, and it's the part that stung me most to find. This video gives you the whole thing, no gate. But a slow, sourced question like this one survives outside the feed only because people fund it directly, not an algorithm rewarding whatever's loudest. That independence is the thing that lets me ask, is anyone home, instead of selling you a personality? If it's worth something to you, there's a buy me a coffee link in the description. Pay what you want, or nothing, and stay. Because the mask you assume comes off the second you're alone, doesn't. And I can show you exactly who's still holding it up. Here's the second clue. For Marcus, unwatched hours were the default. For you, they've nearly gone extinct. And that changes everything about who you get to become. Start with how easily a watcher moves you. There's a study I keep coming back to, a break room with an honesty box, where people paid for their own coffee. For 10 weeks, researchers changed one thing on the price list, a small image at the top. Some weeks, flowers. Some weeks, a pair of eyes. On the weeks with the eyes, people paid almost 3 times as much. Just a picture, not a real person, a drawing of eyes that couldn't see anything, and behavior shifted. Now, that particular result doesn't always replicate cleanly, so don't take it as a law of physics. But hold the image, because you are surrounded by eyes now. Every feed is a pair of them. You carry a room full of watchers in your pocket, all day. And here's the twist that really got me. The audience you're most afraid of is mostly imaginary. Psychologists call it the spotlight effect. We badly overestimate how much anyone actually notices us. The stain on your shirt, the dumb thing you said in 2015, you're replaying it for a crowd that forgot it instantly or never saw it. So put those two together and feel how absurd it is. You are ruled constantly by an audience that is half installed in your own head. And that audience doesn't clock out when you're alone. I made a whole video on kindness that's really fear with good manners, a mask you wear for other people. Here's the part that unsettled me. You wear it alone too. You narrate yourself, in your own skull, as the good one, the smart one, the reasonable one, performing virtue for an audience of no one. When I finally tried to sit with genuinely no audience, outer or inner, I found I couldn't. There was always a ghost in the seats. I'd been performing for it so long I'd mistaken the performance for a self. So that missing authentic me was never laziness, or some flaw I needed to fix. It was simpler and stranger than that. I'd never once gone into the room where a self gets built, because I'd never turned off the audience long enough to enter it. And that reframes the entire question. So here's the piece that made everything click. And it's the answer to the question you came in with. You don't have a true self hidden under the masks. Not because you're empty or broken, because no one watching isn't a place you go find yourself. It's a state you have to build. And almost no one alive ever enters it long enough to build anything there. You've spent thousands of hours performing, for real crowds and imaginary ones, and maybe a handful of minutes genuinely unwatched. Of course the room's unfurnished. You've barely been in it. So the self was never going to be discovered, sitting there finished, when the masks fell. It's whatever is left when you subtract every audience, including the one inside your own head. And for most people, that leftover is a stranger. Not because there's no one there, because they've never spent time with him. And this is what Marcus actually meant by character. Character isn't your private behavior. It isn't just how you act with the door closed. It's something more exact than that. It's whether there's a single you that acts the same, whether the door is open or closed. Whether the watched you and the unwatched you are the same person, or two different performances for two different crowds. Let me put it as plainly as I can, because it's the whole video. The distance between who you are when you're seen and who you are when you're not, that distance is your character. Not a metaphor for it, it is it. A small gap means there's a real solid self running the show in both places. A wide gap means the person everyone knows is a performance, and behind it is someone you've never actually met. So the real work was never to find yourself. It's to become someone who's the same in the dark. So how do you use this? Not as a nice idea, but tonight. You start by catching the audience in the act, not fixing anything yet, just noticing. That reflex to narrate what you're doing. The urge to imagine how this would look to someone. The hand reaching for the phone in the first half-second of silence, before you've even decided to. Every one of those is the audience, showing you it's still in the room. Most people go their whole lives never once seeing it, because it feels like just thinking. It isn't. It's stagecraft, running on autopilot. Then you measure the gap, honestly, and without flinching. Pick something specific. How you talk about people when they're in the room versus the second they leave. How much effort you put into a thing that gets seen versus the identical thing that no one will ever know you did. The care you take with a stranger you'll impress versus the person who can't do anything for you. Each one is a little reading on the same dial. How far apart are the watched you and the unwatched you? Because that number, not your best public moment, not your worst private one, that distance is the truest thing you can know about your own character. I'll be honest about my own reading. The gap was wider than I wanted it to be. That's not a comfortable thing to write down, but it was the first real information I'd ever had about who I actually was, instead of who I was performing. But there's a way this whole insight curdles, and I've watched it happen, to other people and to me. So before you go start measuring, let me show you how the measuring goes wrong. There are two ways this rots, and I've been near both. The first is the sneakiest, because it looks like the cure. You take, be the same whether or not you're watched, and you turn it into a performance. You become the person who's so authentic, so real, so unbothered by what people think, and you make sure everyone knows it. You post about not caring. You build a brand out of your realness. But look at what that actually is. It's the audience again, wearing a better costume. Performing I don't perform is still performing. The ghost didn't leave. It just gave itself a more flattering role. The second failure is uglier, and it's the opposite move. You use the private me is the real me as a permission slip. The version of you that's cold, or lazy, or cruel when no one's looking. You decide that's the authentic one, and the decent public version is the fake. So you let the worst of yourself off the leash and call it honesty. But that's a lie too, and a convenient one. Character was never about liberating your worst impulses in the dark. It's the reverse. It's whether your best can survive with no one there to reward it. Anyone can be good on stage. The question is whether the good needs the stage at all. And one more, quieter trap, because I fell in it. Being alone is not the same as meeting yourself. You can sit in an empty room for an hour and never once be unwatched, because you filled every second of it with the performance, the narrating, the scrolling, the ghost. Solitude is just the doorway. It doesn't do the work for you. So the point was never to catch yourself being bad in private, and it was never to perform being good. It was something quieter than both. So I'm not going to hand you a plan to find yourself. A 10-step program to become authentic would just be one more show with me as the audience. That's the opposite of the point. Two things, small, both invisible on purpose. The first, sometime this week, do one thing well that no one will ever see or credit you for. Not a big gesture. Clean the thing properly when you could have faked it. Keep the small promise you made to yourself that no one else even knows about. Do it to the standard you'd hold if the whole world were watching, precisely because it isn't. You're not proving anything to anyone. You're checking whether a you shows up when there's no reason for him to. That's the only place character actually lives. The second is harder, and it's the whole thing in miniature. Next time you catch yourself narrating your own life to the invisible crowd, composing the caption, arranging the moment, stop. And let the silence go unnarrated for 10 seconds. No commentary, no performance. Just you and the quiet, with the audience switched off. It will feel strange, maybe even lonely at first. Sit in it anyway. Because that unbearable little room, the one you've spent your whole life avoiding, that's the room where a self gets built. There's no other one. You don't have to find yourself tonight. There may be nothing to find yet, and that's not a failure. It's just an honest starting line. You only have to do one thing. Turn the audience off long enough for someone to finally walk in, and then have the nerve to see who it is. So here's the challenge, and no one will ever see you take it, which is the entire point. This week, one thing done well that earns you nothing. No post, no credit, no witness. And watch whether a you shows up when there's no audience to show up for. That single unwatched act will tell you more about your character than any public year of your life. And in the comments, do the brave version. Name one thing you only do when you're certain no one's watching, the good or the ugly, your call. Because the second you write it down, it's witnessed, and that changes it. Watching a whole page of people admit the private self is a strange kind of relief, proof none of us are quite who we perform. That sentence costs something to type. That's how you'll know it's true and not the flattering one. Send this to the person in your life who's always on, even alone, even with you. And if you want work that keeps asking questions the feed would rather you didn't, the link's in the description, not charity. Fuel for the room where the audience is finally off. I'll be here Monday.